You know that feeling when you finally reach the one place where your mind can breathe? For me, that was my beach house on the Oregon coast. After 6 months of nonstop 80-hour weeks, I finally carved out 5 quiet days for myself. I drove up the long gravel road, ready to collapse into silence. But before I even stepped out of my car, the bass from inside the house hit me so hard I felt it in my teeth. My peaceful retreat was shaking like a nightclub. My stomach tightened. Something was wrong, very wrong. I pushed open the front door, and my heart dropped. Strangers were everywhere. People I had never seen in my life were lounging on my couches, drinking, laughing, and treating my home like a rental party house. My custom furniture had scratches across it. Red wine stained the white wool rug I'd saved for months to afford. The air was thick with the smell of weed and spilled beer. My beautiful sanctuary felt ruined. I walked deeper into the chaos until I finally spotted someone familiar, my sister, Jovi. She was on the deck, stretched out like she owned the place, sunglasses on, drink in hand. Her husband, Brendan, and his parents, Marlene and Walt, sat around her, enjoying the ocean view without a care in the world. "Jovi, what are you doing here?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. She didn't flinch. She didn't even look embarrassed. "Relax," she said, waving her hand like I was a child throwing a tantrum. "You weren't using the house. So we borrowed it. Borrowed it. Like my home was some spare t-shirt she found in her closet. When I told them to pack up and leave, the reaction was worse than the mess. Instead of apologizing, Jovi started mocking me. She laughed at my work schedule, my quiet vacations, my so-called boring life. She called my solitude sad, my dedication pathetic. Brendan joined in, saying I was selfish for not sharing my big, empty house. Marlene and Walt nodded along, acting like I had ruined their trip. Then Jovi leaned forward and delivered the final blow. "Get out of here, you lonely loser. This is our vacation now." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I just stood there, stunned. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just watched them gather their things, rolling their eyes as if I was the problem. While they packed, I walked through the bedroom, and something caught my attention. A small slip of paper sticking out of a bag. I pulled it out and felt my chest tighten. It was a receipt for a $2,500 watch bought with a credit card I didn't even realize was missing. Right then, something changed inside me. The moment the last car left the driveway, I didn't collapse in defeat like I used to. I grabbed my phone. I called a locksmith. Then I called my lawyer. For the first time in my life, I wasn't backing down. This time the fight was mine, and I was ready. When the house finally fell silent and everyone was gone, I stood in the middle of the mess, trying to breathe. The shock I felt earlier didn't stay for long. It slowly shifted into something sharper, cold, steady anger. I knew I couldn't just cry or sit down. I needed proof of everything that had been done. So I took out my phone and started recording every single detail. I photographed every stain on the carpet, every scratch on the furniture, every broken glass, and every mark on the walls. I moved room by room, capturing the damage with the calmness of someone who had already crossed the point of being overwhelmed. When I reached the master bedroom, I pushed aside a pile of clothes Jovi had left behind, and something unexpected caught my eye. Several shopping bags were stuffed deep into the closet. I pulled them out one by one, and my heart sank. Inside were brand new designer dresses, expensive electronics, and shiny pieces of jewelry. Items I had never seen before. The tags were still attached, and every receipt showed the same thing. My name, my cards, my money. The total was more than $25,000. It felt like discovering a secret room full of betrayal. I rushed to my laptop and opened my banking apps. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through my statements. The truth hit me like a punch. It wasn't just shopping. There were cash withdrawals I never made, hotel bookings I never stayed in, restaurant bills from places I'd never visited. It felt like I was reading a stranger's life, one that someone else was enjoying with my money. Jovi hadn't only used my home. She had drained my accounts like it was her right. I called my lawyer, Rhonda, without waiting another second. She listened quietly as I explained everything. Her voice stayed calm, firm, and direct. She told me exactly what to do. Freeze all my cards and accounts immediately, file official reports for fraud and burglary, and send legal notices to stop Jovi from touching anything else that belonged to me. Hearing her confidence helped steady my heartbeat. For the first time since the chaos started, I felt like I had someone on my side who knew how to fight back. But before I could even finish gathering documents, my phone exploded with calls and messages. First one, then another, then both my parents calling nonstop. When I finally answered, all I heard was yelling. They didn't ask if I was okay. They didn't want to know what happened. They shouted Jovi's version of the story, how I overreacted, how I embarrassed the family, how I attacked her for no reason. They demanded I apologize and fix things before this mess gets worse. I stood there with the evidence beside me, the truth in my hands, and still, my own parents refused to believe me. It hurt, but it also made one thing very clear. I was on my own, and I was going to handle this my way. When my parents showed up at my place, I thought they were there to support me. Instead, they sat me down like I was the one who had done something wrong. They told me to be the bigger person and forgive Jovi because family shouldn't fight over money. That was the moment I realized something was off. My own parents were speaking to me like I had agreed to everything. Then they told me the part that shocked me. Jovi had told the whole family that I gave her verbal permission to use my account, my cards, and even my home. Hearing that felt like someone punched me. She didn't just lie. She built an entire story to turn everyone against me. I needed answers, not apologies. That's when I hired a private investigator. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted the truth. When the PI returned with the report, I finally understood the real reason behind all of this. Brendan, her husband, was drowning in debt from a failed business deal. He wasn't just struggling, he was desperate. Suddenly the shopping spree made sense. They weren't buying things to enjoy them. They were buying things they could resell quickly. It wasn't a mistake. It was a strategy. But the PI found something worse. Months ago, when I asked Jovi to house sit for me, she had secretly photocopied my financial records and property deeds. My chest tightened reading that part of the report. She hadn't stumbled into temptation. She had planned this. She had studied my accounts, my assets, everything. That discovery changed everything inside me. It hurt in a way I can't even explain, because it meant she was already preparing to betray me long before the shopping, long before the lies. Then, out of nowhere, I got a call from Walt, Brendan's father. I almost didn't answer, but something inside told me to pick up. He spoke with a shaky voice, almost whispering. He told me he was ashamed of what his family had done. More than that, he told me Marlene had encouraged Jovi from the beginning. She believed that family money is shared money, and that I was selfish for keeping my own assets to myself. Hearing that made me feel sick. My trust wasn't just broken, it was used, talked about, and dismissed like it meant nothing. I sat alone after that call, holding everything I had learned. The lies, the planning, the debt, the photocopies, the manipulation. The betrayal didn't feel like a single moment anymore. It felt like a web that had been slowly tightening around me. That was the moment I stopped seeing Jovi as my sister. I saw her as someone who chose to hurt me, who worked with others to take from me, who felt entitled to my life. The choice hurt, but it was clear. I had to press full criminal charges. Not out of anger, but because what she did wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a crime. And I finally accepted that protecting myself was more important than protecting her lies. I arrived at the police station carrying a binder I had spent hours preparing. Every receipt, every photo, every statement was carefully organized. Detective Shaw looked through it, his eyebrows rising with each page. They practically documented their own crime, he said, sounding almost impressed. I didn't feel impressed. I felt ready. For the first time, I knew this fight wasn't one-sided anymore. I had the proof, and now the law was on my side. A few days later, I got the call. Jovi and Brendan had been arrested at their apartment. Felony burglary, identity theft, and grand larceny were the charges. I heard that Marlene had posted bail immediately, but seeing their mugshots online made the whole situation real. This wasn't some abstract plan anymore. It was happening. The news spread quietly at first, then slowly through our social circle. People who had admired Jovi's social media posts, the luxurious beach house, the fancy dinners, the shopping sprees, began to see the truth. Their posts and their carefully crafted lives didn't hide what had actually happened. Sympathy started shifting toward me. Friends who had doubted me, who had whispered about my reaction, were now reaching out, asking if I was okay and offering support. Then the phone rang again, and it was Jovi. She left a voicemail, and I listened to it once carefully. She was crying, her voice shaking as she pretended to apologize. She blamed Brendan and his family, saying they pressured her. She even promised she would pay everything back. I felt a wave of anger and disbelief. I knew better. I had seen the evidence, the planning, the receipts. This was just another attempt to manipulate me, to make herself the victim while trying to lessen her punishment. I didn't reply. I deleted the voicemail. There was no point in responding. Her words were empty, and I refused to let them distract me. I had already made up my mind. My focus had to stay on the civil suit. I wanted every dollar returned, and I wanted damages for the emotional toll this betrayal had taken on me. It wasn't about revenge, it was about justice, about making sure that all the harm she caused was acknowledged and corrected. Sitting in my office, I felt a sense of calm determination I hadn't felt in months. The law was finally moving in my favor, and I could see a path ahead where my life and my property were protected. Jovi and Brendan's consequences were just the beginning. I wasn't going to let anyone manipulate me or diminish the effort I had put into my life. Every decision I made from this point on was deliberate. I had proof, I had the law, and I had my resolve. Nothing else mattered. This time, I wasn't just defending my property. I was taking control of my life. After the arrests and the initial chaos, I turned my attention back to the beach house. It wasn't enough to just clean up or patch things up. I wanted it to feel like mine again, stronger and safer than before. Using some of the frozen funds that were released once the fraud was proven, I began a full renovation. Every wall, every floor, every corner was refreshed. I added new security, repainted rooms in colors I loved, and replaced damaged furniture. With every step, I felt a sense of reclaiming not just my home, but my peace of mind. The house wasn't just repaired, it was transformed, and it felt like mine more than ever. Once that was done, Rhonda filed a civil lawsuit against Jovi, Brendan, and their parents Marlene and Walt. Walt was involved because he had benefited from their actions. The suit demanded triple the stolen money for punitive damages, along with the cost of repairs and legal fees. I knew it would be a long battle, but I wanted every bit of justice I could get. This was about accountability, about making sure that what was done to me had consequences. Not long after, Marlene showed up at my office. Her face was red with anger, and she spat out threats. She said she would ruin my reputation and expose family secrets if I didn't drop the lawsuit. I could see the desperation in her eyes, but I didn't flinch. I stayed calm, listened to her, and let her leave. I knew every word she said could be used against her. Then something unexpected happened. My younger brother, Kellen, who had stayed out of all the fights and always tried to remain neutral, finally looked at the evidence himself. Seeing the receipts, the photos, and the records made him realize the truth. He stepped forward, telling me he was on my side. I felt relief and support for the first time in weeks. His decision caused tension with our parents, who were still defending Jovi, but having someone in the family back me gave me more strength than I could describe. Rhonda used Marlene's threats to strengthen the case. She added witness intimidation to the lawsuit, showing a clear pattern of harassment and coercion. The threats only made the case stronger, proving that this was not just a one-time event, but a deliberate campaign to manipulate, intimidate, and steal. I felt a sense of control returning to my life. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was taking charge, using every tool and piece of evidence to ensure justice was served. Every step of the way, I realized that this fight wasn't just about money or property. It was about reclaiming my power, my dignity, and my life. I had been wronged, yes, but I was no longer the victim. Every decision, every move, every careful step in the legal battle was my way of showing that I would not be intimidated, and I would not be silenced. This was my counterattack, and it was only the beginning. After weeks of preparation, the district attorney finally contacted me with an offer. With all the evidence I had gathered, they were ready to make Jovi and Brendan a deal. They would receive felony convictions, but their jail time would be reduced if they fully confessed and agreed to make restitution. It was a relief to know that the law now recognized the truth, and that I would finally see some justice. Then came the shocking part. Brendan, desperate to save himself, turned on Jovi. He admitted in court that it had all been her plan. She had decided to use my credit cards, she had photographed my documents, and he had only gone along with it. Hearing him testify against her left me both stunned and vindicated. I felt a strange mix of relief and anger. Relief that the truth was finally out, and anger at the betrayal that had caused so much pain. Jovi, realizing she had no one left, completely fell apart. Her husband had turned against her, and prison was now inevitable. She came to my beach house one afternoon, screaming and crying, begging for mercy, for understanding, for forgiveness. I didn't open the door. I called my lawyer instead and let her handle it. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me any longer. I had learned my lesson. This time, I stayed calm and detached, letting the law and my preparation speak for themselves. A few days later, my father, Gerald, came to see me in secret. He had been distant, siding with the family against me, but after hearing Brendan's testimony, he could no longer deny the truth. He didn't apologize, and he didn't ask for forgiveness. Instead, his presence alone was enough. It was a quiet acknowledgement that he finally understood what had been done to me. For the first time, I felt some connection with him after all the lies and chaos. That small visit broke the family's united front against me and reminded me that even when others fail, justice can still prevail. The civil court date came faster than I expected. The judge went through all the evidence, looking visibly shocked at how calculated and deliberate the crimes had been. Every receipt, every photo, every document played its part. When the verdict came down, it was fully in my favor. Jovi and Brendan were ordered to pay full restitution, plus punitive damages that would leave them financially ruined. I felt a heavy weight lift off my shoulders. All the planning, all the preparation, and all the endurance had led to this moment. Sitting in the courtroom after the ruling, I realized this wasn't just about money or revenge. It was about taking back control of my life, proving that I would not be silenced, and showing that calculated wrongs could not stand. My patience, my evidence, and my determination had turned the tide. Justice had been served, and I finally felt a sense of closure that had seemed impossible months ago. The day of sentencing finally arrived, and I sat quietly in the courtroom, trying to hold myself together. The judge called the case and laid out the penalties. Jovi was sentenced to 18 months in prison, and Brendan received 12 months for his part in the crimes. The room fell completely silent as the gavel came down. It was a moment that felt surreal. After months of planning, chaos, and betrayal, the law had finally spoken, and the truth had been recognized. Then my mother, Cynthia, broke the silence. Her wail filled the courtroom, a sound so full of pain and shock that it made my chest ache. She looked at me, not with the anger I had grown used to, but with an expression of dawning understanding. I could see it in her eyes, the horror of realizing that her favoritism and blind support had allowed Jovi to become someone capable of such destruction. It was painful to witness, but also oddly validating, knowing that she was finally seeing the truth. Outside the courtroom, the fallout continued. Marlene and Walt had no choice but to file for bankruptcy to cover their portion of the civil judgment. Their wealth, their status, and the image they had built in the community all crumbled. Rumors spread quickly, and their reputation was in ruins. People who had once envied or admired them were now whispering about the scandal, the betrayal, and the financial collapse. Watching this, I felt a quiet sense of relief, knowing that the consequences of their actions were real and undeniable. I returned to my beach house alone. The home, now fully restored and secure, should have felt like a place of triumph, but it didn't. I walked through each room, taking in the repairs, the renovations, and the calm. Yet instead of joy, I felt a complex mix of sorrow and reflection. I grieved not just for the sister I had lost, but for the family that had failed me. The house was mine again, but the connections and trust one once had were gone forever. The cost of justice, I realized, was far more than money or reputation. It was the family I could no longer call whole. A few days later, I received a letter from my father, Gerald. It was simple, short, but heavy with meaning. I was wrong. I am so sorry, it read. I held the letter in my hands for a long time, letting the words sink in. It wasn't complete forgiveness, and it didn't erase the pain of the past, but it was a first step. A small foundation on which I could start to rebuild trust and healing, even if only with myself. I realized that life wouldn't return to the way it was, and some wounds would always remain. But for the first time in months, I felt a quiet sense of possibility. I had survived, I had reclaimed my life, and I could finally begin to move forward on my own terms. After the court ruling, the restitution payments started arriving every month. Each deposit was a reminder of what had happened, but also a sign that justice had been served. I decided to use the money wisely, investing it into my business and expanding my work. It gave me a sense of security and independence I hadn't felt before. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was fully in control of my life and my future. Family gatherings changed completely. The old holidays, which were full of tension and reminders of betrayal, became a thing of the past. Instead, I celebrated Thanksgiving and other special days with Kellen and a close circle of loyal friends who had supported me through everything. These new traditions felt genuine, filled with warmth, laughter, and the kind of connection I had been missing. I realized that chosen family could be just as meaningful as blood relatives. The beach house, once a place of intrusion and pain, had transformed into something far more important. It became a sanctuary, a symbol of my resilience and hard work. I could sit on the deck, hear the waves, and finally feel safe and at peace. The security system I installed wasn't just practical. It was a quiet guardian, a reminder that I had the power to protect my life and my space. Sometimes I still checked the inmate database, not because I wanted to, but to remind myself of the consequences of letting people take advantage of me. The anger I once felt had settled into a calm, watchful caution. I had learned to stay vigilant without letting fear or resentment control me. Life had taught me lessons that were harsh but necessary, and I carried them with quiet strength. Finally, I packed up the last boxes of evidence and gathered the designer clothes Jovi had bought with my stolen funds. Donating them felt like a release, a way to remove the final traces of toxicity from my life. It was symbolic, a way to fully close that painful chapter and move forward. With every act of reclaiming, whether through investment, creating new traditions, or clearing out old reminders, I felt lighter and freer. My life had a new rhythm, one that I had shaped for myself. I had survived, I had reclaimed my home and my power, and I could finally enjoy the peace and independence I had fought so hard to achieve. Jovi's release from prison came quietly, but it carried a weight I couldn't ignore. She looked different, sobered, hollow, stripped of the arrogance she once wore so easily. The court placed strict probation on her, and she was forbidden from contacting me. I knew this was necessary, but it still left a strange mix of relief and unease. Even years of planning hadn't prepared me for seeing her free yet powerless, knowing I would never have to face her manipulations again. A few weeks later, through my mother, I received a message from Jovi. She wanted to meet, not for forgiveness, but to explain everything she had done. I read the note carefully and felt a surge of emotions: anger, disappointment, and finally clarity. I didn't reply. I didn't want to meet her. Some bridges, once burned, can't and shouldn't be rebuilt. I had learned that the best protection is distance, and keeping her away was part of safeguarding my peace. Around the same time, my mother reached out to me herself. Months of therapy had clearly changed her perspective. She gave a full, unprompted apology, acknowledging the mistakes she had made. She admitted that her favoritism had allowed Jovi to act without consequences, and that she had neglected my feelings for too long. Hearing her words wasn't easy. It brought back a flood of memories, but it was also validating. It showed me that people could change, and even those who hurt you could eventually recognize the truth. Life outside of family drama began to settle into a cautious normalcy. I learned that Jovi and Brendan had divorced while he was still in prison. There was no satisfaction in that news, only a quiet understanding that the life they had tried to build through lies and manipulation had completely collapsed. Their schemes had failed, their connections broken, and I could finally move forward knowing that the chaos they caused was fully behind me. My work, which had been threatened during the fraud, began to flourish again. I landed my biggest contract yet, a deal that solidified my business and proved my resilience. The success wasn't just financial, it was deeply personal. I had faced betrayal, theft, and family manipulation, yet I rebuilt everything on my own terms. Every client, every project, and every decision now belonged to me and reflected my hard work and determination. Sitting in my office one evening, I allowed myself a quiet moment to reflect. I had endured manipulation, deceit, and heartbreak, yet I had come out stronger. The past no longer controlled me. Jovi's presence, my mother's apologies, and the collapse of the lies that once surrounded me were echoes now, reminders of what I had survived. My home, my business, and my independence were intact. I had faced the storm and emerged not only unbroken but triumphant. And for the first time in years, I felt completely in control of my own life. I finally changed the lock on my beach house one last time. This time, it wasn't about fear or distrust. It was a ritual, a way to close the chapter and move on. The old key, the one I had once trusted to Jovi, was long gone, and I felt a strange sense of closure as I turned the new lock. It was a small action, but it symbolized so much: freedom, control, and a fresh start. The whole experience had changed me. In some ways, I felt harder, more cautious, more determined never to let anyone take advantage of me again. At the same time, it softened me in ways I didn't expect. I learned to value real connections, to notice who genuinely cared, and to protect those relationships while keeping my boundaries firm. I realized that life wasn't about letting others control my peace, but about knowing when to open my heart and when to close the door. I never shared my story for attention or sympathy. Instead, I used it as a lesson, especially for young women trying to navigate their careers and personal lives. I mentored them on how to protect themselves financially and legally, even from people they thought they could trust. Sharing what I had learned felt more meaningful than telling the whole dramatic story. It was about helping others avoid the mistakes I had endured. Sitting on my deck, listening to the waves crashing, I felt a calm I hadn't known in years. The house was mine in every way. Every wall, every corner, every moment of peace belonged to me. I realized it wasn't just the property that was reclaimed. It was my life, my confidence, and my ability to choose what mattered most. The security, the space, and the solitude weren't just external. They reflected the inner strength I had fought to reclaim. Now I think about the future with excitement. I make plans to travel, something I had always postponed for work. I understand that life isn't a fortress to defend, but a world to explore. I carry the lessons I earned through the pain, wisdom, caution, and resilience as my protection. For the first time, I feel free to live fully, to embrace new experiences, and to enjoy the peace I fought so hard to achieve. My life, my home, and my choices are finally completely my own.